Mexico just now, as has been referenced throughout the conference, is a tale of two cities, and I think Fieldwood and Wintershall Dea are perfect examples of the juxtaposition of what Mexico is going through right now. Potentially with Fieldwood and the announced deal with Lukoil, it means that the secondary market is still alive and well, and of course that's something that is, I think, of high interest for operators around the world. Without the access to organic acreage, the secondary market is going to be the only entrance. So pending approval, I think it'll be extremely interesting to see this moving through. On the other side, with Wintershall Dea and the announcement by Pemex regarding Zama earlier, it's highlighting some of the challenges that still face operators in Mexico. So we certainly, I think we'll hopefully touch on some of those topics as we move through our panel discussion today. But as Carolina mentioned, I think it's going to be very interesting to understand perspectives outside of those two stories, although I'm sure that we'll touch upon those. So to start off, Andres, I'd like to ask you, and then Sylvian, I'll ask you the same question. How has 2021 represented a recovery from the 2020 timeframe for operators who are getting close to their production phase? And Andres, I'll ask you to answer first, please.
Sure, and thanks for the invitation. Happy to be in this panel. Thanks for Mexico and Gas. It's always good to share with you our views. And Shriner, very good question, the one you start with. Let's say that 2020 was a significant challenge for the industry altogether, worldwide and in Mexico. We were already facing low prices, and then COVID hit us, and that significantly changed how companies operate. And it was significant challenges in terms of updating all your processes, particularly in our case, going offshore, all the procedures and protocols to keep people safe, which was our #1 priority, while we were developing an extensive offshore campaign where we were building basically 2 production platforms, the interconnecting pipelines, and we were drilling simultaneously with 2 rigs, 1 at each location in the case of our project, 1 in Ichaquil and 1 in Pococh. So as you can imagine, we had more than 600 people offshore working day to day, and then COVID hit. So we had to adjust everything, all our protocols, to make sure we took enough preventive measures in order to go and improve, not to halt operations, and be able to continue. And this is just a reflection of what happened to us, what's happening in the same time to all the industry. So it was a health emergency or crisis worldwide, particularly for offshore operators, because offshore operators had an additional challenge to onshore operators, is that all the people in the vessels, in the platforms that are changing crews, sometimes you could not change the crews. For example, we had an issue with people from Trinidad that was working, and Trinidad just closed borders. So suddenly you have 60 people that cannot go home. They don't know what to do, and they don't have a time frame as to when they can go back home and see their families. So as you can imagine, this had a tremendous impact on all companies, not only operators, but service companies as well. So we had to work together to solve this issue. So going back and reflecting 1 year, almost 1.5 years after the crisis started, I think operators have learned how to cope with COVID. Vaccination programs have significantly helped as well. But nonetheless, it is time to continue to be cautious and continue follow the precautionary measures. We have seen, for example, the Delta variant, how much more transmissible that variant is of the COVID virus. And we need to keep our guards up. So, but significantly, I guess that the industry as a whole has learned how to deal with COVID, has adopted protocols much more in line. Of course, there are some differences between operators and service companies, but pretty much we are aligned on some quarantine periods extensive testing, basically test prior to embarkation, sometimes twice prior to embarkation, and already in the vessel do some random testing, and sometimes testing 100% of the individuals. So that's basically how the industry is coping with the COVID challenge, which was a major challenge. And of course, prices are going back. We have seen a significant improvement and recovery of prices. That is just a reflection of economic activity going and increasing around the world, and also as the expectation improves for the years to come, we see a bright future going forward for the oil and gas industry, primarily because we were already coming since 2015 from a decrease in prices. So there's been a number of years where companies have not invested in developing some assets. And today, or not only today, but in the next 5 years, we're still going to need production while we go into the transition of energy. So that we do see a positive, at least 5 to 10 years in pricing for the operators. Of course, we don't think we're going to go back to the pre numbers of $150, no, that we were seeing. We don't expect that. We know that there's enough oil in shale that could be brought back any moment. But we do expect a positive outcome from this year going forward.
Thank you for that answer, Andres. And thank you. You picked up on some very kind of relevant points, and one of those being that a higher oil price makes things easier for everyone. Sylvan, I want to give you an opportunity to also respond to that question.
Yeah, hi everyone. Pleasure to be here with you today, Shaina and Andres, participating into that panel. Well, not to repeat, of course, what Andres just said on the impact of the pandemic on our operations and the subsequent impact of the prices. But I would say, you know, within the oil industry, there's always a difference of time scale between what you could react very quickly to, and actually the length of the project, which usually spread over many years, and you know, somehow are a little bit more independent to these very quick changes. So I have to say that, of course, although we had to change, you know, and adjust a few things, especially with regards to our onshore production operations, you know, more or less all of the other projects continued relatively steadily, I would say, you know, with the ups and downs that happen every day. As you may know, Wintershall Dea here has quite a large portfolio in Mexico, and quite a varied one, going from, you know, onshore operations to shallow water to deep water, going from exploration to development project to mature assets, participation with Pemex, with private companies. So I think it's very generic and very broad portfolio. And I have to say that, you know, both for the exploration projects, you know, the Zama project as well, our activities in Ogario, you know, there might have been a few adjustments that we've done on the short term, but still the mid to long term projects continued relatively steadily. And also in particular, I think in Wintershall Dea, we like to operate directly from the country where we have our activities, and you know, not have an operational base from, I don't know, from another country or from the headquarters. So for us, it's also, you know, since the business unit here is still relatively young, we kept, even in 2020, hiring people, you know, making our team, you know, stronger, and integrating new people, which was and still is definitely a challenge, you know, to integrate persons. And now there are certain people that have, you know, been working in the company for about a year, which I have never met physically, so to say, you know. So that's what I would say. I mean, to complement the answer from Andres.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's you know, a challenge that industry is dealing with throughout, the fact that people are still being brought into organizations, and yet the traditional kind of onboarding has not been able to happen. And so companies have had to adjust and think about new processes and new ways to bring new talent on. But appreciate that answer. Maybe now we could switch, and Sylvan, I'll start with you on this question. And I would appreciate maybe if we could also in this question kind of address the elephant in the room from a Wintershall Dea perspective. But when you think about your kind of current production time frame and those goals, what were some of the processes that you have used to develop that time frame, and how has this process been affected by the events of 2020 and more particularly the most recent events in 2021?
So again, I think I would, you know, to answer properly, I think again mention this topic of the time frame of developing, you know, oil and gas projects. So, of course, in you know, the only asset that we have today in production is our asset in Ohio that we operate ourselves. So in there we can be pretty reactive. This is on top of that a mature asset, so that requires, you know, that has a lot of wells that require permanent maintenance, permanent activities, and of course, you know, as soon as you have budget restrictions or you defer certain activities, then you immediately see an impact on your spendings and on your revenues as well. So that allows you to play relatively quickly. However, for all the other projects, being, you know, the development in Zama, being the appraisal activities that we do in the discoveries that we've made, and in the exploration activities, this is something that we need to continue to mature. So all of these projects have challenges. Zama in particular, you know that it is, I mean, as you say, that's a bit the elephant in the room. There is, you know, different parties that have different views, that have different objectives, and of course, it is really not a piece of cake to get alignments and make that move forward. However, I mean, despite all of our disagreements, I mean, you know, we have to recognize that all these things needs to be defined, and they cannot all be defined in the ideal way of, you know, one particular stakeholder or the other. So to me, it is very important in order to keep maturing these projects, which will not bring production in 2021, but, you know, this is rather preparing the second half of the 2020s. We need to continue maturing them. And I think whether talking about Zama or whether talking about all of the other projects, we are all talking about partnerships here. And we need to mature these partnerships in a way that the different stakeholders understand each other and understand the limitations and the objective of each other with the common goal to make the project happen. That's not easy. That goes through, you know, establishing trustful relationships and so on, which is not always easy. But if you are looking at the long term, that's basically a must. So that's really what we are trying to achieve in all of our partnerships.
Thank you for that response. Andres, maybe same question to you, and I think this is, you know, obviously of high interest considering the recent news with regards to Lukoil, because you know, obviously they're seeing something as well in this space. So would be very interesting to get your thoughts on that same question.
Yeah, just talking on following up of what Sylvain was mentioning. Remember that these projects demand a long-term thinking. No, so what you're seeing today in terms of execution, it is what was planned 2, 3, even 5 years ago. So this is how demanding these oil and gas projects are in terms of preparation and future thinking. Going back to your question, so for us today we are seeing the results since we started investing in 2015. So when Fieldwood first entered into Mexico in 2015 and started operations in 2016, we are seeing the result of all those years of investing and planning. and we're thinking and starting commercial production next month. So we have made significant commitment in terms of investment, de-risking the project geologically, but the project itself, it's much larger than this first stage, right? So we are in an early production stage. That was a strategy to try to put in production these assets as quickly as possible, so that we could de-risk the project as well, and test the production sharing contract. As you know, we are pioneers in this. We're all companies like DEA and ourselves are pioneers, and we are learning as we go. So we are really testing the waters here as to what works and what doesn't, and the interpretation to the regulation particularly. There's nothing black and white. There's a lot of grays, and you need to understand those and move and adapt to those changes. So moving back, I think that the next stage in the project, what we call our phase 2, is really ramping up the production of this field. I mean, this field, it's the fifth largest field in terms of reserves in the country. And there's a lot of activity that needs to be planned and done in the future that will take more than $2 billion in investment. That's why we think that in terms for Lukoil was a very attractive asset to acquire at this particular point. Again, since we have de-risked the geologic and the reserves have been certified by a third party and also validated by CNH. So we think that this stage, that's why they are very interested, and it will be beneficial to have a company with such deep pockets, because the next step is really the one that takes a lot of capital. And the faster you can accelerate that deployment of capital and the execution of work, the better the results for the country, because you are increasing production faster. The more reserves you can get out of the ground, and also it's more beneficial for investors. So that's in a nutshell what we think.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and certainly it's worth bringing up that things that are happening today are results of decisions that were taken many years ago, and I guess to follow up on that point, as you begin to enter into production phase, how do you expect that will deepen your geological understanding of the assets, and then how will that geological understanding then kind of inform for sort of future drilling campaigns? And maybe Andres, we'd start with you, and then I'll move to Sylvan to ask the same question.
Sure, that's a great question. So today, what we have, back in 2017, we did 2 wells, and we did a long-term test for almost a week. These wells were flowing. So we did that dynamic testing. But in the end, you really need the production data from the wells. So that's what's critical, and the next step we're going to be learning. And the good news is that we strategize this in our project in the sense that we're going to be producing for the 2 reservoirs that are in the Ichaquil field. The Ichaquil field is the largest from our development, and it has both Cretaceous and Jurassic production. And we're going to be testing those simultaneously. So one well will be producing from the Jurassic, one well will be producing from the Cretaceous. And all those learnings will be incorporated, as well the ones with the production from Pococh, where we just have Jurassic production. All those learnings, of course, will be incorporated and will shape how this project moves ahead. And of course, as you were mentioning correctly, it will have an impact on the locations. No, the more data you have, the more data points, when you tie those to your seismic, the better the resolution and the better the certainty on how you want to locate the future wells. And you learn as you go and develop these reservoirs. It's different to other areas of the business, like midstream and downstream, where you have pretty much the idea of how exactly it's going to work before you build it. Here, you never know until you put your last well. So you are learning every day, and every well counts, and every day of production counts toward that learning. So that's something we're eager to show what these wells look like. We are confident that we can surpass our targets. So we're confident on that. And hopefully we'll give good news to everyone in the near term.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. You learn almost everything at the end of a drill bit when it comes to understanding future plans. So Sylvan, can I ask maybe the same question if you have something additional to add there?
Well, I mean, again, I think it really depends on the portfolio. I mean, on our side, we have several things which are quite different, as I mentioned before. So if I go from onshore to offshore, on the onshore side, we are talking about a mature asset. We took over, 3 years ago, a little bit more. And of course, we came with some ideas and with some plans. And now that we executed our activities in drilling new wells and making some major interventions and different things. Now we, of course, with the learning, assimilating that in order to update our future plans. We would like to develop also a water injection project in the Ogario field, which is the next main step that we will that we are planning for in that field. And so that's for the onshore part. Now going offshore. Course, then you can talk about Zama again, where the field has been explored and appraised, and now we are in this discussion, hopefully to move forward to get a field development plan, and not only on the technical side, but with also all the other elements resolved, which is not straightforward, as you can imagine, because we also need to tackle the commercialization part. And the elephant in the room there, which would be the financing of the project, because we are not talking about a small investment. And of course, when you're talking about large ones, then that means you need to get some banks, and then you get even more stakeholders into the project. So that doesn't make it much easier. So that's all what we need to do. But as per today, at least from technical information, there should not be anything additional. There should not be any new well drilled unless Pemex eventually at some point drills a well on their side. But as far as I understand, that's no longer the plan. And then assimilating this data that we would receive once the next wells are drilled, which would mean further down the road after the investment has been sanctioned and the platforms are designed and built and installed and so on. This is something which is very important in the case of Zama, because as you know, we are talking about a unitization here, the first one in Mexico, and of course, the determination of the participation. I mean, there's nothing you can do with certainty because you're defining it with subsurface analysis. So it's not like you would go into a room and you would count, the piece of equipment in one factory and say, okay, this is yours and this is mine. Here we are talking about subsurface evaluations, and of course, the more data we get, the better this subsurface study would be, and the more refined the participation would be. And of course, for an asset like Zama, it's very important. That's the second point. And then for the exploration part, I think it's also extremely important, of course, to integrate all the data that is possible. On our side, we have the luxury that we actually have a whole bunch of licenses in the very same area. And so any new well which is drilled where we could get access to the data is to us another piece of the puzzle, because we have the luxury to see the whole picture, and then we can, by seeing the result of one well into one block, it may or may not help us risk or de-risk a prospect in the next one. So that's again very important, despite all the circumstances, to continue the activity as quickly as we can in order to make discoveries and go from exploration to appraisal, from appraisal to development in the most optimum time frame.
Thank you for that. I want to pick up on something that you've both mentioned independently, which is quite an important factor, which is the financing of these projects. And how do you, and I'd like you each to respond individually, how do you, from your company's standpoint, see Mexico and your portfolio there in terms of your wider financial obligations? And how do you plan to be able to kind of meet the production goals that you have in mind with the current financing situations that are present? Maybe Sylvain, we'll start with you.
So I might repeat myself a bit, but I mean, in Wintershall Dea, I mean, we are really long-term focused. So we have operations in 13 countries, and today worldwide production of about 650,000 barrels per day. So when we decide to join a country, this is really with a long-term focus, and with the ambition to be a preferential long-term partner to the specific country. And our approach there might be a little bit different to other companies in the sense that we, as I said, we establish our base directly from the country, which is not easy at the beginning, because that means you need to hire a lot of people, you need to establish a lot of processes and so on. But again, with this view on the long term, that's really key for us. So that's what I would say. And that long-term focus and this ambition to be a preferential partner, has impacts in the way we approach our, the different projects, and especially how you think about the timing of all of these projects. Now speaking about financing, again, our company worldwide is very healthy on a financial point of view. We have, I think, quite a particular size in the sense that we are not a major, but we are not a small E&P player either. We are not in the midstream or downstream business. We're pure upstream player, but our financing are pretty good. I think if you look at it from a corporate standpoint, it is not like every project need to tap into external financings. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be handled through our corporate cash flows. Of course, Mexico is a kind of a new country and the most growing one within our worldwide portfolio. So if you look at it long term, that means, I mean, these very years that we are rather seeing an inflow of funds into the country rather than the opposite, But in particular for when going for large projects, Zama and hopefully the deepwater projects that will happen following the discoveries we have and hopefully will continue to have, will somehow not force us, but it will be required in some ways to also tap into the external financing part. And that's really a key. I mean, especially for a project like Zama, it is really at the center of the discussion, because otherwise, if the project is not bankable, since we will require anyway this external financing, if the project is not bankable, if there are some concerns on certain guarantees or certain parts of the project, again, should it be more technical or commercial or whatever, then the amount of money that from the capital market that we could tap into, should it be just for us or for all of the company participating into the project, will get little, will get reduced day after day, and then if on top of that you sum up the concerns from the energy transition and the fact that all of these capital holders are looking eventually also at making their own transition, the access to this capital market is getting more and more difficult every day. So that is indeed again, although maybe on our side we might have a little bit more flexibility than others, it is definitely one of the most important concern if we want to make the projects happen.
Are there any ESG related issues to your portfolio, and particularly the Zama asset that you could envision seeing when you're out there trying to raise capital?
Well, of course, I mean, if we want to raise capital, there are requirements now to be compliant with certain requirements, with the Equator Principle, with all sorts of things that that the capital market asks for, which again is becoming more and more day after day. In particular, I think on our own side, again at corporate level, we have a very heavily gas balanced portfolio. So more than 70% of our corporate portfolio is actually coming from gas. So our profile with regards to emissions is actually pretty good compared to other upstream players. The Zama project in particular is relatively good also on that aspect. I mean, we would need to see, of course, in the end what final development concept we select jointly for that field. But anyway, we think it is a fantastic asset with a lot of resources and doesn't have a bad evaluation when looking at emissions as well. So I would say at that stage within our portfolio, both in Mexico or worldwide, we are okay with these potential ESG requirements from the capital market. But indeed, that is something to really, especially when looking long term and anticipating decisions and investments for decades or so, that we need to consider as a top priority, because these requirements are growing very fast and they are changing very fast as well.
Thank you, Sylvain. Andres, I'd like to come to you with that same question, and I guess we can call a spade when it comes to Fieldwood. So I would be interested to hear what you can share in that light, and understanding that the Lukoil deal is potentially out there but has not closed yet. Can you talk about your financing situation vis-a-vis the Mexican assets?
Yes, sure, and I will expand on what Sylvain was mentioning. So what we have seen is an important change in capital markets from the past, I would say 4 years ago. We've seen an important change in capital markets in the sense of really raising the bar to ESG requirements. So the good news is that the Mexican regulation is already significantly stringent enough or strict enough in terms primarily of governance. If you see the governance, the transparency, anti-corruption requirements, they are pretty much clear in the regulation. With regards to, for example, environmental, in terms of ASEA, it's pretty much and pretty strict. Nonetheless, of course, there are some additional requirements that most institutions in the capital markets are related to IFC requirements, primarily in the social activity, or the social and how to handle and manage the community relationships. So working with communities, that is a significant change compared to the Mexico model, and you have to abide with much stricter standards when you are requesting for external financing. And also when you are dealing with Equator principles. So with Equator principles and together with some other IFC requirements, of course, HR standards and how you work together with your primary vendors, with your critical vendors, that is a critical change that operators need to, let's say, put on top of the Mexican regulation. That all comes on top. And that's a significant effort that operators need to do. I think it's very positive for the industry, because you make sure that the money not only goes to the large projects, it also goes to the large projects that have an operator that can meet all those standards and requirements in order to ensure a perfect execution, both offshore and onshore, of the projects with the minimal impact to the environment and the people, and also with the communities. So I think in general that's very good, but there's no doubt that the standards are much stricter, and that the way the banks or the financing institutions are looking these in much more thoroughly than they used to do. So again, I think that's positive, but that's definitely a change from 3-5 years ago, when basically the money went to the large projects that were very profitable, right? And it didn't matter. The ESG was a secondary, was important, but not as important. Today, it's one of the primary considerations that any financial institution is doing before investing.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. Whereas 4 or 5 years ago, ESG may have been included on the any other business line of a board meeting. Now it's certainly top, front and center for all kind of not just financial institutions, but also energy companies as well. And certainly a move that has been needed for some time. Maybe we can take a step back. And I know that during this discussion, we've mentioned a number of different things that could be potentially challenging for the development of these projects. But let me ask you in a more broad sense, how do you define the sort of biggest challenges to developing your Mexican assets? And I want to kind of give you some carte blanche to speak about a variety of things. I'd ask you to maybe be a bit concise as we're coming up toward the end, but I think the audience would certainly be interested to understand from a two operator standpoints the biggest challenges that you see moving forward in Mexico. And let's start, Andres, with you.
Thanks. So I would say there are two types of challenges. No? There are technical and other regulatory broad challenges. I would say that technically for us, the wells we are drilling are very complex. They are very deep, no? Almost 6 kilometers. They are high temperature. They are different pressure regimes, so that requires very complex handling of operations, high H2S content, so that puts a lot of risks into the mix. So that's one critical area for our project. But that's something, there's the expertise fieldwood, and there's also expertise primarily in Mexico. That's been done before in Mexico. So the critical, that was not the largest challenge. I think that navigating the regulatory or the new regulation with these projects that are doing things for the first time. So for example, I can name you a lot of things. We were the first. We were the first company to sell oil to the Mexican Petroleum Fund. We were the first company to drill with these type of high temperature wells with the new regulation for wells. We were the first ones to also lay a pipeline with a real lay in Mexico. That means you don't have to be welding all the pipelines segments as you are going. You weld all your 6 kilometer pipeline onshore, and then you just lay in one single campaign. But that was never been done in Mexico before. So doing that for the first time. We were the first operators that we lease the Tumut platform from Pemex. And that means this is the first offshore lease done in Mexico ever. So of course, that took a lot of time and effort. We thank Pemex for all the support, but it went beyond Pemex. There were many other agencies involved because this is a federal asset, and it was the first time this company, two operators, were sharing a facility, and we are operating the facility, not Pemex. So of course, these changes that are not only regulatory, there are also operational changes, and just this changing all this mindset from a single operator to these partnerships where two operators are working together and making these synergies to improve the economics of the projects, basically. In our case, we wanted to work this platform because it was saving us from building a new platform in order to separate and meter our currents in order to be able to sell our oil and gas. So that saved us a lot of time in building, because that platform was already there and had no use. So again, there are many things that these projects are doing for the first time. Every operator has their own challenges. I just explained you what were mine, but working something for the first time requires a lot of energy. And we have received a lot of support from the authorities or from the regulators. So that's working fine, but it takes energy and you need to learn, and there's a learning curve associated with doing something for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Andres, let me just pick up really quickly on one point there, which deals with kind of the infrastructure. How do you see sort of the best path forward for transition from commercialization through Pemex infrastructure to commercialization through independently owned infrastructure? I just want to maybe follow up on that very quickly, and then Sylvan will come back to you.
Sure. And that's something we're learning. We're just going to be starting next month to market our production through Pemex. So for us, the benefit of doing that is that Pemex had already all the infrastructure out there. It's in good condition, so we can produce through Pemex. And that saved us also, let's say, 2 years of building a 100-kilometer pipeline to shore with additional facilities required to be able to pump with such a long distance, both oil and transport gas. So for us, that was a critical decision to work together with Pemex. So we think this is also a very good solution for Pemex, because if you remember, some of the assets where we're going to be producing, or we're going to be sending the production, these were assets that were producing 400,000 barrels 5-8 years ago. And due to the natural decline of the fields, now they are producing much less, and they have enough capability and capacity to transport and gather our crude. So that's I guess the synergies I was referring before, that there are a lot of synergies in this industry, different to other industries. Operators don't really compete with one another once they are developing the fields. We just compete on the bidding phase, but after that, we're really working together to find the solutions to problems. So this is again one example of that. Going forward, of course, there are different things you need to analyze. So this project is going to be producing for more than 30 to 40 years, right? So the next question comes is, what's going to be the reliability of the existing infrastructure in 20 years? Are you going to have issues with costs due to the tariffs of the transportation? Because as you know, typically you have a lot of fixed costs in terms of maintenance to these pipelines. And if you are transporting or gathering there half the volume, then your tariff goes to double, right? It's that simple math. So those are the questions you need to address. How is this gathering infrastructure to gather the crude and send it onshore? How it's going to behave in the next 30 years? So that's when you start thinking also on strategic and making yourself independent, also to have a newer asset that can sustain 30 years of production. So that's sort of the balance where we are, and that's why our project has always considered our second phase to be an independent marketer, primarily because the infrastructure or new infrastructure will have higher reliability, and as you know, higher reliability, less downtime means higher production. So that production more than contemplates the cost or covers the cost of building these additional assets. So that's why we think it's important in the future in our phase two to be an independent marketing and having the infrastructure to be able to do that.
Thank you for expanding upon that there. And then Sylvan, I'd like to come back to you with the original question, which is, when you think holistically about your position in Mexico, what are the major challenges that you foresee in the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years when it comes to developing your portfolio? Obviously not just Zama, but the kind of the entirety of what you bought into.
And thinking holistically, as you said, I would answer simply that to me what is above everything is stakeholder management. Of course, you can go into more details and see issues, concerns everywhere. You can look at it from, I don't know, supplier perspectives, from a technical perspective, from a drilling perspective, from I don't know, execution, installation of the platform, capacity of the yards. You can also look at it from more commercial standpoint, dependency of the, through the Pemex infrastructure to commercialize your products. You can also look at it from a regulatory perspective. You can also see issues, as we've just discussed, more relating to the financing part, to ESG. So there are issues everywhere, and I think why I would say that stakeholder management is really, to me, the most important thing today is that I think it is often somehow underestimated how complex it is to make a project go forward. I mean, you have multiple players in the project. I mean, you have the companies, the operator, the non-operators. You have the authorities, the CNR, the CNH, ASEA, maybe some political interest that come on top of that. You have banks, you have, analysts, you have diplomacy eventually on top of that. I mean, if you really want to make a project happen, it cannot be that one of all of these stakeholders that I manage just looks very narrowly into his own objective and say that's going to be like this or no project. Because otherwise it would be very difficult, not to say impossible, to make a project happen. So thinking and to complement what Andres said, that it is true that in Mexico, since the energy reform, everything is relatively new. There are many things which are done for the first time, and I think both of our companies are very well placed to know that. And there are plenty of relationships, that needs to be developed, and that's not something that you can do overnight, to establish, trust, collaboration, and so on. And to me, this is really the key to everything. If we don't succeed in having a good stakeholder management, again, holistically seeing all of these potential, parties navigating around one particular project, and then it would be very hard to make the project mature.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that you've brought up a point that is, there are many necessary and sufficient conditions that have to be met for a project to go forward. And alignment between stakeholders is fundamental to be able to realize a common goal, which is developing an oil field, particularly of the size of Zama and some of your other prospects that we're certain will be discoveries in the future. We're coming toward the end of the time, so maybe I'll just kind of recap very quickly, and then I'll give each of you a few moments to speak on whatever subject it is that you care to talk to. But I think throughout our conversation today, we've discussed the many different challenges that exist within Mexico, but I think there's been an air of positivity from both sides, from Fieldwood and from Wintershall Dea, and maybe that positivity is not something that is seen as much in the press or in other places, but I think it means quite a lot when you hear the oil and gas companies themselves bringing that air of positivity and a can-do kind of attitude to the challenges that certainly are numerous and are very evident. So I just want to applaud you both and applaud your organizations for maintaining that kind of air of positivity and realizing that with conjoined effort and working with partners, that all things are possible. And I think that's a very uplifting sentiment for Mexico and the Mexico oil and gas business right now. So again, kudos to both of your organizations for having that positive air. We have just about 6 minutes left, so I'd like to give you each 2.5 to 3 minutes to just give some final thoughts or reflections. And maybe Andre, we can start with you.
No, again, my view as an operator is that we need to be move fast. No, we think that due to the energy transition, that is something that is going to happen. There is no question about it. We do have a limited 10, 20-year span to monetize the assets. We all know that there's numerous assets in Mexico. There's no question about the potential of the geology. No, we were talking about Sama. That's another key project that there's the reserves are there. So the challenge is, how do you execute a project to move fast, and how you monetize those assets? So to me, that's the most relevant question that operators need to continue, and the government talking about ways on how to improve and expedite that monetization. So that to me is the critical, let's say, discussion in Mexico. We need to continue to have, and we need to continue to improve as an industry to work together, because it would be a pity if Mexico were not to develop this huge potential of reserves and not take the benefit of that windfall of low energy prices, and also in terms of the final customer I'm referring, and also in terms of the huge economic and social impact, positive impact that these projects could have on the development of the industry in the years to come. So again, I'm positive, but this is something we need to continue to push, and we need to continue to help Pemex. Pemex will always be the largest operator in Mexico, and but there's still, I mean, the resources are much larger than the Pemex execution capability. So that's where we come in to complement and support in this in the development of the Mexican resources. So again, thanks for the panel. Thanks for the invitation.
Appreciate those remarks. I think you brought up a very cogent point, which is that together, many hands make light work when it comes to developing the full resource potential of Mexico, and certainly there's a part to play for independence there. Sylvan, I'll leave you with the final word for reflection.
I would make my final remarks on a bit on the positivity you mentioned. I mean, I think it's very important, especially when working in the oil and gas, to have a long-term view of things. And when going into a country, especially when things are not established, like in Mexico after all the changes that the energy reform has brought. It's important to really look long term and try to keep in mind what is the most important element, which is that everybody has the same goal, which is to develop the projects and develop the resources. And that's very important to always keep that in mind, because disagreements will always be there. But if we don't lose track that we all share that same ultimate common goal, that's what I think will help all stakeholders to move forward. However, just maybe not on a so positive side, is we have to recognize as well that this is not an easy track. It's hard. It's very hard, and we don't need to be naive about this. That just because we think, okay, well, we are there to collaborate, that everybody thinks the same, so to say. So we do not need to be naive as well. But again, keep in mind that keep the goal in mind. So don't lose the goal. That I think is really the essence of it, and which is shared by all the stakeholders for sure.
Thank you for those words, Sylvan, and again, appreciate very much the opportunity to moderate this panel. Very interesting discussion. I know that I've taken away several different things from this that will help kind of orient my view on development of in Mexico vis-a-vis kind of the independent operators. So thank you again to the panelists, Andres and Sylvan, and thank you Carolina, for arranging this.